Every summer, thousands of holidaymakers flock here to the British seaside to enjoy the warm weather, the pebble beaches and the amusement arcades. But there's another side to these shores, a sinister underbelly of violence and murder, where sins are washed away in the tide and where the seafront is stalked by sadistic killers who, like the ocean itself, have no respect for human life. My name's Dr. Nell Darby. I've written extensively about the history of crime, researching the reasons why people kill. Over the course of my career, I've developed a keen eye for spotting trends in a killer's behaviour. Nowhere are these trends more striking than in the not-so-sunny seaside towns of Britain's coastline, which have always seemed to attract an extraordinarily high number of murderous rogues. In this new series of Murder by the Sea, join me on a journey to the cliff's edge, where the land meets the sea, and where life meets death. For at first glance, our seaside towns are all fun fairs, candy floss, breezy promenades. But when the carousel stops turning and the lights along the shorefront go out, there emerges from the darkness an underworld of murder and mayhem. In today's episode of Murder by the Sea, we're in Bournemouth to investigate the deadly love triangle between a beautiful socialite, her young gardener, and the estranged husband who stood between them. It's a story of forbidden desire, played out across the croquet lawns and cocktail lounges of 1930s England, leaving 2 dead and 1 behind bars.
Alma Rattenbury was a rather theatrical bohemian type. She, in her youth, was a very renowned concert pianist. She came from a very theatrical family. Her aunts took part in the premieres of Gilbert Sullivan operas. And she was part of a very well-to-do middle-class family in Victoria and British Columbia. She married during the First World War and lost her husband. Her concert career dried up. She ended up teaching the piano back in British Columbia. And then she met Francis Rattenbury, who's this older, married, wealthy character in British Columbia, who was most celebrated for building the Parliament buildings in Victoria, British Columbia.
Alma met Francis in the early 1920s. Of course, the 20s is, the jazz age, the era of the flapper, women going out and enjoying themselves after the trauma of the First World War. It's a chance to enjoy yourself, of going dancing, entertaining. There are new opportunities for women. You've got this kind of very modern figure coming into being. So she is very much the epitome of this modern style of woman, entertaining others, enjoying herself, wanting more of a life than her mother or her grandmother might have had. She wants to make the most of these new opportunities that are presenting themselves. Francis Rattenbury and Alma were a bit of an odd couple. His attraction to her is kind of a bit dubious. I can't see why she was so drawn to him, apart from the fact that he was an older, respectable figure who'd been successful in his career. I think it was more that she was, again, looking for the love of her life, someone she could be happy with, experience an enduring marriage with. There's also the possibility that she was attracted to him because he wasn't available. He was a married man, a father of 2. Perhaps she liked a bit of a thrill of the chase, of seducing this man or persuading him to have an affair with her. That was part of the appeal because, again, it was a bit of a thrill, a bit of excitement.
I think Alma was looking for security when she married Rattenbury. She had an older son with another man. She didn't have a career anymore. She didn't have a particularly wealthy family and was looking for somebody to settle down with. And she sort of sealed the deal by having a baby with Rattenbury, a little boy called John Rattenbury. And I think that she mentions in the few diary pieces that we have from her that they stopped having sex as soon as the child was born. And so it became a sort of loveless companionship, really.
After a number of years, this marriage to a young, vibrant musician who put enthusiasm into other people's minds began to wane. And they were, if you like, cold, distant, argumentative, bickering.
At this time, committing adultery was kind of quite a shocking thing to do. Francis was a respectable man. He was a successful architect, although his career was on the wane by this point. The fact that he'd had this kind of good career in Canada, but had then had this shocking affair that had led to him divorcing his wife, meant perhaps that his position out there in Canada was untenable. There was a reason for them to need to move. He wasn't welcome anymore. So the couple upped sticks and moved from Canada to England, which was where Francis was originally from, and settled in Bournemouth.
With cracks appearing in the marriage and Francis's architectural career dimming, the couple decided to relocate to England, moving into a property called the Villa Madeira in Bournemouth.
Bournemouth in the mid-1930s was very similar to how it is now, quite a polite, sedate seaside town where people went to retire. And it was particularly attractive to people who were quite wealthy and wanted to retire there. Alma and Rattenbury would have fitted in very well. But it is interesting that they've come from Canada, where they had an architect-designed property with tons of servants and enormous grounds and a sea frontage, and they get to Bournemouth and they're living one step away from the sea in a very small house in a very small plot. And I think that indicates that they've come down in the world financially. They've not only been exiled to Bournemouth, but they've also dropped in social status in a way, because they don't have as much money as they used to. And I think that what this does is it starts to put pressure on the relationship, because Alma is a spender and Rattenbury is a spendthrift. Rattenbury is also an irascible man. He's lost quite a lot of money in the Wall Street crash. He used to be a very famous architect, and now he's effectively retired. And he is trying to encourage his career by doing a little group of flats that he's trying to get some money for. So from being the most celebrated architect in British Columbia, he is now living in retirement, scratching a living and worrying about his investments, getting drunk at night. And at one point in 1934, Alma's getting exasperated by her husband. So he slaps her in the face, and she slaps him back and bites his hand. Rattenbury, who is a 67-year-old man, possibly impotent, drinking quite a lot, had a room on the ground floor next to the sitting room, and Alma stayed upstairs. So at night they were split up. He never went upstairs. There's a bathroom on the top floor and a bathroom on the ground floor.
They lived in the house in Bournemouth, which was known as the Villa Madeira, with a kind of live-in companion stroke housekeeper for Alma. This wasn't unusual. Most houses of a certain stature would still have a servant at this time, or a housekeeper. But she also served to give Alma some female company, to make her feel that she had company when her husband was away or otherwise engaged. But they also needed somebody to help out with odd jobs that a female companion couldn't do. And this is why they placed an advert in the local paper for someone to come and help a young man aged between 14 and 19 to come and help out on odd jobs. The man who replied to their advert and who was given the job of helping them out and helping drive them around places was an 18-year-old local boy called George Stoner.
George Stoner was an unfortunate man. I say that because he made the mistake of answering an advert for a job, and he got himself involved with Alma, and this led to the famous murder case. He left school at 14. He was a farm lad. He lived in the countryside. He wasn't very well educated, typical 14-year-old, left school, worked for his father, and then when he was 18 he answered a strange advert for a male to do some work around the house who had to be scout trained, which was a very odd way of asking for somebody.
George Stoner was the son of a builder, quite a short guy, blonde hair, blue eyes, quite good looking, quite thick set, probably a virgin, a bit of a mummy's boy. And interestingly, all of his family agree that he would spend much of his time when he played out with kids younger than him. He'd been a builder's assistant for his dad, and he'd worked in a garage.
Now, he was very different from Alma. He had stayed in one place pretty much for all his 18 years. He was quite a loner. He didn't have a lot of friends. He was certainly not known to have girlfriends or anything like that. So he might not have been innocent, but he was quite naive. He was quite sheltered. He hadn't got a lot of experience of life. But at the age of 18, he was able to drive, which was what they wanted. And it was also, although not unheard of, it was quite unusual for this Boy Scout trained helper they wanted to also be able to drive. So he was the ideal candidate for them. Alma was at home with a man who was nearly 30. Francis wasn't the most exciting person by all accounts. He was ready to settle down, put his slippers on and just have a nice, relaxed life. Now, they had a child themselves. They had a young son, and allegedly Francis had become impotent after the birth of the child. He and Alma therefore had no sex life. They slept in separate bedrooms. You know, she's this vibrant, active woman. And she must have been incredibly frustrated by the way her life was going with this kind of very suburban, very mundane husband by her side. And then George comes in. Although George is this naive, sheltered boy, he's also kind of a virile 18-year-old young man, presumably attractive. And you can imagine a rapport growing between them, and she sees someone younger who she can have a bit of fun with. And he's flattered by the attentions of this older, glamorous Canadian lady. So you can understand why they're kind of drawn towards each other. And Alma's overseeing the work he's doing. He's working closely with the family, he's living with them, and slowly a relationship builds between them.
I think Alma took to George Stoner. She believed at the time he was about 22, and although she was twice his age, he actually seemed to set her life on fire again. She fancied him. And George, this was a new world for George. He had this lady who was attractive and vibrant, who fancied him, and he began to fancy her.
Despite the difference in age, Alma turned to George Stoner for the physical attention she so sorely craved, and which Francis was neither willing nor able to provide. And before long, Stoner found himself embarking on a passionate love affair with the middle-aged socialite.
Katie phoned me in the night, and I missed it.
Her bed hasn't been slept in.
Sweetheart, I'm in Saint-Michel. Please call me. My daughter's on a French exchange trip. Something has happened to her. If any of your family did something to Katie, I'll kill them.
You want to find your daughter? Trust your instincts.
Missed Call. Stream the full series now on 5.
The Tour de France is on 5.
And here we go.
All the action.
Oh, what a big clash. Wow, wow, wow.
All the passion.
Now a win wearing the yellow jersey.
Tour de France highlights. Stream now on 5.
At the Villa Madeira in Bournemouth, Romance is in the air as Alma Rattenbury conducts an affair with 18-year-old handyman George Stoner, despite the proximity of her ailing husband. But was Stoner and Alma's relationship based purely on lust, or something more? Stoner was being admitted into a strange new world of upper-class privilege, but perhaps it was young love that left him feeling all at sea.
This was like first love of his life. This was his adolescent sweetheart. This was that burning, horrible first relationship where you don't want to ever let go.
As soon as they meet, Alma suggests later, she sort of falls in love with him at first sight. But there's a real problem. He's a servant and he is the hired help. So effectively she falls in love with the staff, and in many ways the story is a sort of Lady Chatterley at the seaside. Very quickly, Alma offers him a room in the house, and they went on a trip to Oxford with Irene Riggs, who's the maid. And Irene and Alma have been on lots of trips together, but this is the first one when there are 3 of them going on the trip, when Stoner is driving, and 2 was company and 3 was definitely a crowd. And in the dynamics of the Villa Madeira, the person who seems to be most unsettled by Stoner's presence is Irene. And there are suggestions that there might be some sort of intimate relationship between Alma and Irene. I'm not sure there's any evidence for that, but there are suggestions that that might be the case. But they are certainly really intense friends, Irene and Alma. And when Stoner moves into the house, it causes a problem between the 2 women. Alma felt comfortable moving Stoner in because she knew she could carry on an affair with him upstairs. And what would happen is that sometimes she would go into Stoner's bedroom and sometimes he would come into hers. And of course, the person who had to be aware of this was Irene, who was her best friend. And I think that caused some difficulty with Irene. But Irene also noticed that Alma was happy with the boy. Stoner has moved into the front bedroom, which was probably the master bedroom, and Alma lives at the back of the house. She has a bedroom at the back of the house. Irene's bedroom is in the middle of the top floor, and downstairs is Rattenbury. So essentially, the 3 of them, the 2 women and Stoner, are cut off from Rattenbury, who is now getting a bit deaf. He's drinking a lot at night, and he is sort of cut off from what they're doing, and I think probably unaware of what's going on. I don't think that he turned a blind eye. I think he just didn't really know what was going on.
It's hard to believe that Francis wouldn't have known what was going on between Alma and George. This is not a huge house. George is living with them. He's right under Francis's nose, and I suspect Francis tolerated the relationship, knew about it and tolerated it because it made his life easier. Alma was happy. If she was happy, she wouldn't be irritated with him or getting frustrated with him. He could therefore relax and just do what he wanted to do. It's not a ménage à trois, but I think there's a certain level of understanding and complicity here, that the relationship is good for the 3 members of the household, not just for 2 of them.
It's interesting to think what this 18-year-old boy could offer to Alma, but I think he offered to her the sort of attractions of youth. He was an optimistic lad who hadn't been bruised by the war, which she had. She'd lost her husband during the war. She'd had a rebound relationship with another man and she divorced him, and then she had a relationship with Rattenbury. And I think his presence in the house suggested some sort of hope and optimism, and he wasn't tarnished by the past, and I think she found that very attractive. It's very interesting, the dynamics of the house in the months before the murder. And one might assume that Alma is she's the employer, she's sophisticated, she's a woman of the world, and you have this boy, and it's his first proper job as a chauffeur, living out of his mother's house for the first time, and he was a virgin when he met Alma. And it might seem that the dynamics between them are that Alma is in control, and I don't think she was. She says in her letters that he was very powerful and that he controlled the relationship. And I think she was addicted to him. He was giving her lots of sex, wanting to be loved, wanting to have physical companionship, and she had it all on a doorstep with this boy. And what happens is that the dynamics begin to change. Now that he realises that he is the master in the house and that she is his girlfriend, effectively his lover in the house, he becomes a bit more domineering.
It's hard for Stoner because he is such an innocent. This is his first proper relationship, and yet he can't have Alma to himself. I think initially he puts up with Francis because it's all new, because he's got the excitement of this new relationship. But as time moves on, he wants more from Alma. He wants it to be this exclusive relationship, and he starts to resent Francis's presence, the fact that Alma still thinks of him, tries to make him happy when she's in a good mood. He doesn't want her spending time with her husband because that reminds him that he hasn't got her to himself.
George kind of got his feet under the carpet in the house. He would sleep in the master bedroom, he would walk across the hall, you know, confidently into Alma's bedroom, spend the night there. It must have been patently obvious to her husband downstairs what was going on. He seemed to accept it. His kind of schizoid, slightly indifferent approach to relationships, it kind of fitted with what was going on. But this bizarre setup didn't settle very well with George's romantic view of his relationship with Alma. This wasn't quite what he wanted. He wanted her totally. And that was something which was at the back of his mind when the incident happened.
Stoner is becoming more and more itchy about the situation, and he's been given control and he's been given license in a way that servants usually aren't, and he wants more of it. At the same time, Rattenbury is trying to get together some money to build some flats, and he's been offered a deal where he needs £116,000, quite a lot of money in those days. He needs another £116,000 to match it, so he's looking for the other half of the money but can't find it. Alma suggests one night that she and Stoner go off to London, and Rattenbury will have a bit of a break. And when they get to London, Alma takes Stoner to a posh hotel. She takes him to Harrods. She buys him crepe de chine pyjamas. She buys him underwear. She buys him shoes. She buys him a hat. She buys him a fawn-coloured coat. She spends loads of money on him. She dresses him like a middle-class gentleman. And interestingly, the shop assistants at Harrods think that he's her son, and he's clearly not. She even gives Stoner £15, quite a lot of money in 1935, to go to a jeweler's to buy her a ring, which seems to be a sort of engagement ring. So in this extraordinary visit to London, they go through some sort of pact where they probably talk about the future, and they talk about what happens if Rattenbury might die. He's 67. He's ailing, he's a bit deaf, he's drinking quite a lot, and they must be thinking of the future, what will happen when Rattenbury dies. So they spend this extraordinary 4 days in London, going to restaurants, going to hotels, going to cinemas, going to the theatre, like a couple. When Alma gets back to the Villa Madeira, Rattenbury is particularly depressed. He's depressed about not being able to get the money for his flats. He's drinking too much, and he's been reading a book which is about an old man who wants to commit suicide. So he's not in the best of mental health, and he's upset and depressed and unhappy. So Alma suggests that the next day, which is a Monday, that they take the car with Stoner driving them and they go to Bridport to see a friend of his. He's a chap called Shirley Jenks.
Alma had talked about taking Francis away to Bridport for a trip, and this was something that George really wasn't happy about and became very, very jealous about.
Shirley Jenks is a millionaire. He's a squire of the local area. He lives in a very big house in Bridport. And Rattenbury thinks that's a very good idea. We can go for a little break, and I can ask a Shirley Jenks whether I can borrow this £116,000. And that seems to be a great idea. When this is mentioned to Stoner, who's just got back from this extraordinary holiday in London where he's been bought these pyjamas and treated to the life of a wealthy gentleman, when Stoner hears that he's to take the Rattenburys to Shirley Jenks's house in Bridport, he's not very happy about it at all. At the same time, when the Rattenburys are discussing going to Bridport that day. They're having tea upstairs in Alma's bedroom. And what happens is that on the landing, Stoner overhears a conversation between Alma and her husband, where Rattenbury suggests to her that what she should do is sleep with Shirley Jenks at Bridport in order to secure the money he needs to build his flats. So essentially, he wants to pimp out his wife in order to do his business deal, and her lover is outside and hears everything. So Stoner is A, feeling he's being treated like a servant, and B, feeling that his mistress is being treated like a whore, effectively. And this absolutely infuriates him.
On the night of the attack, George Stoner happened to be looking through the window at the point where Alma, who was, you know, a social butterfly to some degree, was giving her husband a goodnight kiss. Possibly just, you know, perfunctory, but probably a little bit of guilt in it. But she, you know, just give him a kiss before she went upstairs. Something that someone who is entering into that situation would really be able to accept. However, George, very naive, very kind of first flush of love type situation, was somebody who really couldn't tolerate that. It was almost like a 14-year-old boy with his first girlfriend. Really couldn't stand anybody else being near her. And this intolerance drove him, basically, to a very, very hit-and-miss plan to kill.
I think there are two catalysts to this murder. The first is that the Rattenburys are going off to Bridport to stay with a friend, where Stoner is going to be treated like a servant. He's just been treated like a gentleman, as an equal with Alma, and now he's going to be treated like he uses the back stairs and the back door, and he doesn't like it, he resents it. So I think there's a great discomfort about that. It causes friction between Alma and Stoner, and he's furious about it. He comes in round the back of the house that evening, and he looks through the French windows and he sees Alma and Rats having a kiss when she's kissing him goodnight. And Alma goes to bed and gets ready to prepare her clothes for the trip to Bridport. She's already put out Rats' clothes downstairs in his bedroom. So Rats is probably having a drink of whiskey. He's finishing off reading this book about suicide that he's been reading, and I think he's dozing in the chair.
Alma actually allegedly spoke to him about wouldn't life be different if her husband wasn't around. Now that could have just been an ordinary conversation, but we do know that George became more and more jealous because apparently she was seen kissing her husband and he thought this was totally wrong. They were supposed to have a sexless marriage, and here she was being affectionate to her husband. He clearly didn't like that. He expressed jealousy about that.
George went to his grandparents and borrowed a mallet.
It's very unclear whether he goes to pick up the mallet in order to do the murder, because around the house there are loads of things he could have killed Rattenbury with, a poker or anything around the house, and there are probably tools in the house as well.
He took it fairly purposefully to the house.
He sees Rattenbury lying asleep with his head to the side.
He came up behind Francis Rattenbury and struck him on the head,
hitting the mallet so hard into his cranium that it actually penetrates the brain.
George Stoner was prepared to do anything to defend his role as the only man in Alma's life, even if it meant resorting to murder. And in that moment, the precarious love triangle at the Villa Madeira came crashing down with the force of a croquet mallet, directly on Francis Rattenbury's head.
Congratulations to Miss Simpson on your promotion to head of drama.
Good morning, Miss Simpson. Congrats on the promotion.
Thank you, Cressida. Yes, definitely.
Her name's Dee now, actually.
I think you should apologise.
I'm sure she can fight her own battles.
It's they, not she. One of our teachers doesn't think our voices should be heard.
I will not be bullied into changing my views by entitled teenagers.
Do you hate trans people as well, or just the gays?
I don't hate anyone.
You make out like you're some kind of benevolent defender of the oppressed. It's all performative, a pathetic cry for attention.
I've got your whole tirade recorded.
Cressida has been targeting me for weeks.
I decide how this ends.
You push me, I push back.
The Teacher. Stream the full series now on 5.
At the Villa Madeira in Bournemouth, foul play is afoot, with George Stoner's jealousy boiling over into a fit of violent rage. But was this a crime of passion or a premeditated assassination?
I think quite clearly by getting a mallet or a hammer or a piece of wood or something like that, it's very personal when you kill somebody with that. And also it's very anger-driven. He's gone in there with this weapon in his hand with the clear intentions of hitting, harming and probably killing the husband. It's a very personal thing, it's a very anger-driven killing. And it's usually over in a very short period of time. If you've hit somebody hard on the head, 3 or 4 blows will be suffice to kill them.
He commits this extremely violent, bloody act and doesn't know what to do. And it's almost like it's the least prepared murder. He doesn't know what to do, so he goes upstairs, strangely, gets into his pyjamas, kicks the mallet under the sofa, and then gets into bed with Alma. And she can see that he is really distressed and thinks he's on an argument with his mum. And he gradually says, I've done something terrible and I've hit rats with a mallet. So she rushes downstairs, sees the terrible condition that he's in. He's breathing, but he's very bloody. His teeth are on the floor. She doesn't know what to do. Very, very quickly she's thinking, if we call the police, they'll find out that it was Stoner. He's 18 years old now. They'll find out we're having an affair, and all of the strange situation at the Villa Madeira and their sexual relationship will be exposed to the police.
Francis is still alive and is taken to hospital. Initially, you know, you could say, well, it's an accident, maybe he tripped over something. But when the hospital staff clean away his wounds, they realise that he's actually been attacked on the head and they call the police in. You can imagine panic in the house, actually, when the police turn up.
They're sort of local Bournemouth bobbies and they arrive on their bicycles to find the house in uproar. The lights are all on. Alma's now paralytic. She's been drinking whiskey all night. There's a gramophone record on the gramophone, blaring at full blast at this little house on Manor Road.
Alma is she's quite a highly strung character. So by the time the police arrive, she's either very drunk or on drugs. There's a bit of dispute about whether she was self-medicating with drugs. She certainly drank. So she's kind of almost incoherent. She's shouting, screaming, crying. There's periods of locking herself in the bedroom upstairs. Bearing in mind also her young son is in the house, asleep at the time. So she's not really thinking about him. She's not really thinking straight. And she repeatedly says that she has done Francis in. She's claiming responsibility for this attack. George also starts claiming responsibility. Their stories change. They kind of switch roles in terms of claiming responsibility for this attack. And there's this sense of chaos, of panic in the house as to what's happened. It's not evident that this is a premeditated attack where they've thought out what they're going to do afterwards.
Although both Stoner and Alma try to claim responsibility for the murder, the police decide that Stoner is the one selflessly covering for his guilty lover, and instead place Alma Rattenbury under arrest for attempted murder.
Alma makes a written statement to the police in her bedroom, then she gets dressed. She wears a fur coat and hat, as a lady of her status should. And then she says goodbye to the servants, she says goodbye to Stoner, and she says goodbye to Irene. She sees her little boy at the foot of the stairs before she goes off and says goodbye, and it's the last time she ever sees him.
Initially, the story would have only garnered, fairly brief mentions in the newspapers because Francis was still alive. So initially, it's an attack or an accident, but he is alive. And it's it's less than a week later that he dies. So then this attack becomes a case of murder. And therefore, a murder story is going to be huge anyway. But added to that, you have this married woman having an affair with a far younger man. And that is what we love. We love kind of a bit of sex and death and crime. It's got all the characteristics of a brilliant story. And Alma's this glamorous figure who is having an affair with an 18-year-old man. And when this story emerges, it's just the story of the year.
The press was appalling by today's standard. The press had a field day. They were talking about her being an nymphomaniac without any evidence of it. They were publicly shaming this woman. How she ever had a fair trial is impossible to say, because the press were having a field day because she had actually slept with one of her servants. It was almost like D.H. Lawrence kind of story, and it just offended everybody. From the middle-class professional establishment, they did not want to hear this kind of story. Yet at the same time, everybody was buying the papers to read of the scandal. So this poor woman today would have probably just gone past without mention, but at the time was the biggest story, and it ended up filling pages and pages of the public newspapers.
But what happens then is that Stoner, who is living in the house with Irene, begins to feel more and more responsible for the fact that his mistress has now been arrested for attempted murder. And then what happens is that Rattenbury dies of injuries. So Alma is then arrested for murder. She's charged with murder, and that makes it really, really serious. Of course, at this period in British history, if you're accused of murder, you may pay for it with your life. So this 18-year-old boy now feels completely responsible for what might happen to his mistress, and she might die. Irene makes her statement. She says that Stoner is responsible and Alma is innocent. And then the police meet Stoner at Bournemouth railway station when he's returned from London, having not got to see Alma that day. The police court is jammed full of hundreds of people. There are people queuing outside. And what's interesting in this point in British history is in the police court, the prosecution get to say whatever they want. So they bring in evidence, they tell you the story from their point of view. So in these months, the whole story is about this manipulative older woman who's manipulated this young man. She has got him into a sexual relationship, and then, like sort of Clytemnestra or Lady Macbeth, she's got him to do her bidding and murdered her husband and got him out of the way. And that seems to be what the story is, that she's extremely manipulative, that she's a villainess.
But rather than the villainess, Alma was the loyal lover who would do anything to try and prevent George from having an appointment with the hangman.
Many Pets Pet Insurance. Get a quick quote today.
It's not the physical evidence that makes a story. It's the people in between and the things that join those people together. Hate, love, fear.
Extraordinary stories. Original drama. Watch, stream on 5.
To progress.
Hi, the Hardacres.
Cheers. Dear God, my mother is coming here.
Do you own a port?
Herring shop.
Yeah, we started out as gutties.
That family has to be stopped.
Let's play.
The Hardacres. Stream the full series now on 5.
It's 1935, and the gentle Bournemouth seaside has been rocked by the murder of Francis Rattenbury. But the shockwave sent throughout the town is but a ripple compared to the one tearing through the Old Bailey in what was being dubbed the trial of the century.
So Alma's given her evidence. She's a star witness of the most sensational trial of the 1930s. And then the summing up happens from the defence and the prosecution. And what's interesting is that both the defence and the prosecution dramatise Alma in a really negative light, that she's a sort of slattern, that she is manipulative, that she is immoral. But what the defence wants to say is that she may be guilty of all of these things, and she is not an attractive character, but she's not a murderess, and that's what they want to make clear.
Both Alma and George were brought to court, basically charged with the same thing, the murder of Francis Rattenbury. It was fairly clear to the jury they did not take very long over it to acquit Alma and found her not guilty of the crime. They found George guilty. George's counsel and George's story kind of centred around the fact that he'd completely got out of it taking cocaine. And this was his mitigation for having committed the act. George's understanding of cocaine really kind of revealed that he didn't have a clue what it was. He seemed to have a vision of kind of black pepper. So it wasn't rational, and it was not accepted when it came to sentencing. He got the full sentence. The judge donned the black cap and basically sentenced him to death.
George had been convicted of murder, for which the sentence was a death sentence. So as far as Alma was concerned, her lover, at 18 years old, was going to go to the scaffold for killing her husband. She was faced with the guilt of knowing this, and the tragedy of knowing that she was kind of partly responsible and that George was going to die. Now, as I've said, she was quite an emotional person. She lived through her passions. She felt everything very strongly. So she felt that she couldn't go on living, that she had ruined everything. George was going to die. She also had the shame of being exposed as this adulteress, this woman who had been having this affair with an 18-year-old. She'd come out of court to booing. She felt all that very strongly, and she couldn't see a way forward.
She goes off to Oxford Circus. She buys herself a knife, and she buys herself a pink nightdress, and pink was her favourite colour. She used to wear pink quite a lot. She had pink flowers in the garden. And then that morning she writes a very, very long, very honest suicide note in which she says that she cannot bear to be responsible for the death of Stoner. She feels responsible for the death of her husband, and she doesn't feel, having read the newspapers and remembered what the judge had said about her in his summing up, that having been depicted as this scarlet, immoral slattern, that she can ever face her sons in the face again, and that the only thing she can do to carry on is to kill herself.
Alma was totally distraught. Her life, if you like, from being on a high, was now taking a very tragic turn. And being a highly emotional person, she, if you went with this tide in a downward spiral and basically tried to commit suicide. She first went to the railway station, but it was too crowded. She tried to throw herself under a bus, but again, there's too many people. So she found a solitary place that she used to go to years ago that was tranquil.
She gets to the side of the river, she's chain smoking, has a large box of cigarettes, she's a chain smoker for much of her life, and then writes a few more little notes to loved ones to explain what she's doing. She talks about what it's like at the side of the river, how beautiful it is, how calm it is. She talks about the water.
She walked into the river with a knife and she stabbed herself 6 times in the heart and released herself into the water.
That's really hard. And then walked into the water, and she probably died before she hit the water. But what it is a very Roman death. It's quite theatrical, it's quite operatic. To continually pierce your heart 6 times is extremely painful and physically quite difficult. So she doesn't choose to take drugs, she doesn't choose to gas herself. She chooses one of the most painful deaths you could choose for yourself, and then she dies. And her body floats in the river.
It's like something straight from a film, but this was real life.
It's really sad that Alma killed herself thinking that George was going to be executed because, of course, a petition was raised asking for his reprieve, and it garnered, thousands and thousands of signatures. And so he gets his reprieve. He serves only 7 years in jail, and then he lives this long life. He gets married. He has the life that Alma didn't. And you do wonder what she would have done had she found out that George had been reprieved. Would she still have killed herself, or would she try to carry on her life then? In this case, which involved 3 people, it's Alma who we remember, and Alma who is discussed and debated. I think partly because of her rejection of kind of sexual mores of the time, that she wanted to enjoy herself, she wanted satisfying relationships, and so she would undertake them even if they were unconventional by the time. But she's also, as I say, this very passionate, very strong creature. She lives by her emotions. She wants to enjoy herself. And I think that's something we can all relate to, that we all want an exciting life. We don't want to be bored. We want to be happy. And that's something she tried to do throughout her life. And so because she was breaking convention, she was living her life as she wanted rather than according to the dictates of society, we remember her. She's different. Whereas ultimately, Francis was very conventional. George Stoner was conventional and ended up leading this long life in his local area. But Alma was different, and so she's the one that we look to and that we want to write about.
Her death is actually interesting because it almost mimics a Victorian saga of the lost woman who takes her life. I mean, we have to remember she had a young son at the time, but she was so in love with George that she was going to give it all up. She could not see her life beyond him and his imminent expected death. She just couldn't see beyond that. She saw it very much as there was the great love affair, and there's only one solution. She can't live without him, is to take her life. Normally having children interferes with suicidal ideation because the woman's maternal instincts would be powerful enough that she thinks, I can't do this for my children. Many times women have wanted to commit suicide and they haven't because they've got children, and that keeps them alive. In this case, the urge for her to commit suicide was so powerful that it overrode her maternal instinct and everything else, which again made her the villain.
She didn't kill anybody. She was a woman who was maybe ahead of her time. She was sexually forthright. She was, maybe she confused the class system in Britain at the time. Maybe she was too bohemian. Maybe she was a little bit of a drunkard. Maybe she took too many drugs. She didn't kill anybody. And so her body lies unmourned in that cemetery in Bournemouth, which I think is really tragic. Because actually, if she'd done what she did, loving not wisely but too well, these days, I think people would think of her more of a heroine rather than a villainess.
And so Francis and Alma Rattenbury were reunited in death. A fitting vindication, perhaps, of their wedding vows. But what of George Stoner? Public opinion declared him to be the victim of a predatory older woman's plot. A petition for his release was signed by over 300,000 people. But was he an innocent led astray?
or a hopeless romantic who would do anything for love?